9% of the communication in the sales process is what? The actual words. 91% of the communication in sales is two things. What is it? Tonality and body language.
Hey, this is Blake Sloan. I've been selling real estate over 14 years. Our team of highly trained professionals, along with our unmatched marketing, has sold thousands of homes here in the Myrtle Beach area, and this is how we do it.
So when I asked you guys, did you listen to your presentation? That's why that's so important. We can say the same exact words, but one can have great tonality, one can have shitty tonality, or one can have great certainty, one can have shitty certainty. That's why they didn't assign with you, and that's why they didn't get ultimately to a 10 out of 10. Because you're not mastering this piece here where the words are just a very, very small piece. The big part here is what was my tonality and my body language. Which is also why if you're elite, you want to record yourself visually with a camera of some type so you can see how you interact with the people. Do I fidget too much? Because I can say the best words, but if I'm too fidgety or not paying attention, what do they feel from me? A disconnect. And they feel uncertain. And so if I know if I'm transferring emotion, I have to be very, very well dialed in and connected to them overall. Okay? And so it's very, very important for us to understand and look at. And they have to really deeply connect you on two ways. Right? They want a rapport, which is, not going to be a word I'll look at in a second, on the outside, rapport on the inside. Then he calls it external and internal. You guys remember that? What do they talk about there? What's external rapport?
You address.
External rapport is a conversation you have. Hey, you're from North Carolina, I like North Carolina, whatever it is, right? That's the basic stuff. But the internal rapport, what does that mean? This is important to really realize. This is where most people get caught. This is their gut feeling about you. So my job is I have to make sure that I'm laser focused in on them and their gut feeling is always good. That's why if I'm sitting at the table, I don't care what's going on behind me. Guess what I don't ever do? Turn around. Some of y'all, you'll get the slightest door open, you start a presentation, look out the door. You just broke rapport there. They're no longer connected to you energetically. Laser focus on what happens in the house. Dogs barking, I don't give a shit. What am I doing? Laser focus on them. It's better for me if I have commotion going on behind me, around me, and I'm laser focused, and they think, wow, this dude's dialed in. And you want to make sure that you're following that same process when you're doing that, and I don't want to lose that internal rapport with them. And that internal rapport is broken down really to understanding of that gut feeling they have. Okay? Now, we talked about this other thing, the action threshold. The action threshold is the unconscious set point that somebody has to be motivated in order to take action. The unconscious set point, somebody has to be motivated to take action. So what does that mean there? Action threshold, this is important. This is really one of the most pivotal pieces here.
So you have to question what's going to happen if they don't take action.
This is their belief about life, specifically the movie that plays in their head. There's a belief or a movie that plays in their head when you're going through that conversation, and it goes one or two ways. What do you think that is? This goes great. This guy or this girl is amazing. It's going to be a great transaction, a great experience. Or, guess what? I don't trust this guy or this girl. Something about them is not right. This is going to lead me down living in the van down by the river. Right? Based on, what is that based on?
Their belief.
Belief, which is based on what? Their previous life experiences. So what's happening is I'm not aware, as most agents, of what their life experiences are, and so most agents are too novice to really ask the right questions or guide or gauge that. And so what happens is you're not really understanding they have a very high action threshold, which means no matter what you say, they're not going to be able to say yes because of the previous things that happened before you ever met them. Unless I do what? Ask them, now I have to make sure I'm able to do that. I do that through really three main things. Number one is language patterns. The things I say and how I say them. It should be certainty, things like that. Right? Which is also helpful. Number two is belief busting. That's by far the biggest one. What does that mean there?
Changing their worldview.
Yes, which is about what?
Changing Their beliefs.
Real estate agents, most of them, hey, had a bad experience for. So if they had a bad experience previously, what do I need to know? Or what do I automatically know? They have very high action threshold because they already had a bad experience with a previous agent. I can go ahead and note that in my head as I gather intelligence that guess what? I need to make sure I over pepper in positives that outweigh the negatives. Okay? You have to look at this like a scale. And so the scale here, and I think they even draw it out. They have a scale. It comes in. Based on the scale, you have what? Positives, negatives. And for most people that have a very high action threshold is they already have a shit ton of negatives already stacked in their scale. And so me as a salesperson have to be very good at doing what? Stacking like crazy positive value and positive outcomes and positive affirmations in a way about what's going to happen to them here on this side. Most people go to the close too early without really doing that, and they can't figure out why that same person says no. Or if they're surprised they get a no on the back end, guess what? They didn't pick up on a high action threshold. They didn't really go in. So in essence, what you have to do is you have to move this middle part of the scale here to help make it where it's more, obviously this is somebody who may be let's say that they're a 7, right? I want to move them to be a 5. And I pepper in the positive things here on what that is. What could that be? I'm making logical cases for my product and for my experience or for my whatever it is I have. And so I want to be aware as I'm going down the straight line, I'm reading this person in the conversation, in the questions I ask. And there's a question you can ask that helps address this. Right? Anybody remember what the question is? Let me ask you this, what's the worst that can happen? What does that do there?
Uncovers their biggest fear.
It uncovers their biggest fear. It uncovers what this person is thinking that's going to happen. It tells me what the narrative is in his or her movie that's playing about me and about the situation. Let me ask you this, Rick. What's the worst that can happen? Well, you screwed me over. You locked me in this long contract, blah, blah. Okay, well, now I know what I'm dealing with. And then at that point, that's when I'll be able to go back and get to work. So that's a word track that you want to make sure that you have saved in your pocket that you're using and you're going back and forth. A lot of people just fold like a cheap seat whenever they get the objection. And so I want to make sure I'm going back through and really analyzing this and nailing this so I can go in and make sure that I'm hitting it, right? So, very, very important piece there. And so I'm stacking that piece on the action threshold. That's a good way to look at it. So I do this, right, as I have a set point. I understand that, hey, look, this person has a very high action threshold. They had a bad experience with the last realtor. He or she was an idiot. They screwed them over. They didn't respond to their calls, whatever it is. I understand that, and so I'm going to ask them what's worst could happen. They tell me what happened or what they think could be the worst case scenario. I'm now taking that as my intelligence, and I get to work at that point. What I got to do is I have to stack on good things that will happen by doing X. At the same time, eliminating the negative things they think will happen based on the systems and processes I already have in place based on our system. That's where we have something that's tangible that we're able to do so. Same thing with writing an offer, too. Let's talk about the good things that happen. Because that means that those people have a belief system that they're programmed. And here's the thing. Humans operate in patterns. And so everything they see unconsciously is based on and grouped in a pattern. And so their pattern of how they experience life is tend to be what? Negative. And so I just want to understand that. I have empathy for that. Now I slow down and go back to the process, and I use questions and language patterns and stacking the positives here to help move their action threshold higher in that straight line process. Does that make sense for you guys there? Now, that's the sneaky killer for a lot of people, which I think is a big deal that we want to kind of talk about, right? That's something that's super important to look at that you just kind of run into overall. And I had a couple notes kind of about it too. Let me see where it was that I had. Yeah, so I had here, some have a very high action threshold, some have a very low action threshold, right? And that comes from their person's core beliefs. We have to lower that action threshold for them for whatever it is. If they're a 7, my job is to get that to a 5 and then stack things on it. Does that make sense? And so I want to visualize in that part. If they're ultra high, I lower that for them by doing so. And so I do that piece, right? So if they have a low action, right, it means they have obviously a very positive movie that plays. If they have a high action threshold, It means you have a very negative movie that plays. And so that's a simplified way for me to understand the framework and break that down overall. Right? My goal here is to knock out the negatives and bring in the positives in that scenario. Here's the crazy part. Some people will buy with a 7, some will buy with a 5, some will buy with a 3. It just depends with that. Every person's different. And so a true expert is going to do what? Move it back down, engage through questions in the process. This is very true on the listing side. It's more difficult on the listing side, right, to sign people, which is important. So that's important. Once I crack them, though, here's the crazy part. Once I crack somebody with a very high action threshold, what usually happens? They're the hardest to crack, but guess what they are? The most loyal. They're the ones that are clients for life for you. They're the ones that send you referrals for them because they're very tough to break. Very few people break that combination. And so even though it's hard for you in the front end, understand it's worth it because they're the ones that are going to be your client for life and very, very loyal to you and unlikely to go somewhere else, somebody else in the process. Why is that? Because how they're wired. They don't want to go sit in front of 3 more salespeople, interview 6 more agents. They just want somebody they can trust because they have a very hard time trusting people. That could be something that happened with their parents as a kid, the way they grew up, where they grew up, what happened, the environment they grew up in. That comes from, like I mentioned, their core beliefs. And so that's one key part is once they're cracked, they don't usually change, right? Which I think is super important. Pain threshold, what does that mean? What a lot of people realize is most people know they need to move, they don't move though. So they have this thing here, the pain threshold. And so I'm looking at the same exact way here is a scale. And my job as I'm getting the intelligence is gathering what's going on and understand most people are sedated and so they're not really making the move they need to make because they're so sedated. In what? In drugs, in alcohol, in all kind of stuff. TV, Netflix, video games, whatever it is they're sedated in so they're not making the actual decision or move they need to make. And so what happens is my job is to do what? Expose the pain. What's the second piece of that? Expand the pain. So for me to do that, I have to do what? I'm going to have to know it. Many of y'all don't even ask the questions deep enough, right? They don't log the notes in the CRM or the back end of the system, depending on which one we're using. They don't log what the actual pain is. And so that's why you're not able to expand the pain because you don't even know what the pain is. Now, if you have 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 clients, there's no way to know the true pain of every one of them. So the best way is to always log the pain. I made it mandatory for the appointment he booked for me. I had to know what the pain was on the telephone call so I could go in there knowing at least an idea of the pain. I can test and verify the pain, then I go right for expanding it. And so you want to have that in the notes. You can always go back and access that. Okay, I get that in my telephone call. I get that in my face-to-face meeting, whatever, or my virtual. And then I want to use that throughout the process because when all of a sudden, if they're hesitant to sign, but I get them over there with pain, all of a sudden they're also going to be hesitant when they write the offer. Or they get the offer on their house. And so I want to go back and constantly use that pain to create leverage. Why is that? Because they need it to make the decision. They have very natural low pain threshold, most of which is because they're sedated. My job is to move that up the scale. Okay? And so I do that through what? Through questions?
What's it gonna look like if you don't make them?
Stories. Mostly like the what ifs.
Could you use like third-party stories like to help somebody with their action threshold as well?
Yeah.
Like positive, like hey, I had a client just like you, thought just like this.
Yeah, especially the ones from Northeast, right? They tend to, if the New Yorkers, they tend to be what? More difficult. Why is that?
I don't know.
New York City is a tough place to live. People are trying to screw you everyone every I know the first time I took my buddy there one time, we got out of the airport and this guy charged him to get a cab and it took like $20 and shut the door and the cab drove off and he's like, we already paid the guy $20 for the cab. I'm like, dude, you just got hustled. Right? But that's just the way that they are because everybody's trying to hustle them and so they're used to that and they have a very, very high defense mechanism that's built in from the belief system. And so I understand that. I'm like, hey, look, man, guy just like you, he's from New York. Guess what? He didn't trust anybody. Now he loves me. I'm his favorite realtor in the world. You know why? And it'd go through the third-party story. Why is it important? Because now Joe, the guy, is going to connect with the other person based on the story and location. Does that make sense for y'all? Super powerful, super important piece there. Now my job there is to have them do what? I want them to feel the pain and I want them to own the pain. What does it mean when I say own the pain? I need them to say it. They don't own it until they say it. A lot of y'all just ask the question and then talk about it, but like we talk about all the time, telling's not selling. So if they don't actually speak it, it's not true to them. And so I want you to use that as your own threshold. If I can get them to say the pain, at that point they've owned it. If they don't say the pain, they don't own it. Do you think it could be from not making decisions and moving it like you have, whatever it is? Because some of these people have been searching for houses for what, 5 years? And so my job, here's the thing. If someone's been searching for a house for 5 years, what does that mean? They haven't had a great salesperson who's been able to close them and do two things: move their action threshold, move their pain threshold. That's why I feel that we have an obligation as good salespeople to move them across that line, because if they would have bought 5 years ago, guess what? They'd be feeling love me right now because their property would be double worth what it was when they paid for it. But instead, they're crying about how much more it costs and how much higher interest rates are. And so by them being scared, it costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's just why I feel like I own that responsibility to move and close them. Why? Because I'm selling the right product, and I know it's the right thing for them based on what they're doing. That's something I don't believe in, right? But if I do, I can use this tool here, and I feel I have an obligation for them to do so. I feel I have an obligation to collide with him or her because I understand the value of real estate long term. What's the problem with real estate? Most people are scared to buy it. Why? It's a very high-ticket item, has a very high monthly cost. Usually what? 5-10% of somebody's income. A lot of times more. And so with that, there's fear, but that's really the longest, most appreciating thing I've really seen. That's really much more, I guess, stable than the stock market in the past few years. So it's important for us to realize. We had a success story. Guy paid $170 a couple years ago. Now he's sold it for $270. Right when he's about to go in foreclosure, had some hard times. Guess what he did? He went and put $100,000 extra in his pocket, moved on, started a new life because he had bought that previously. Those are the type of stories you want to have because he has that asset or she has the asset. Right? So very important for me to understand that overall. We went from a frenzy to hesitation. And so part of what we're going to do is hesitation is going to be what? More fear, right? Higher action, and really less pain. It's going to be more pain, but I'm going to have to move the pain out to make them take action. And so my job is to get very good at this. This is going from really I was listening to some other things this morning, from an amateur to a professional market. 2 years ago, last year, any amateur can get in real estate, sell houses. Right now, it's required to be a true professional at what you do to be able to survive and thrive in the business. And so part of that's going to be going back and studying this. If I talk about this and you hadn't gone back and studied it, there's 500 other hungry agents in our marketplace, way more hungry than you. They're actually doing the fucking work. They're studying at night, watching this stuff, going through, learning, relearning it. Why? Because they're hungry. They're trying to take your commissions. And so you want to have that piece of you that goes in and studies, because this is a market of professionals. No longer can amateurs get away doing this shit. The problem with a lot of you guys, you still have the amateur habits instead of professional habits. Super important. Anybody listen to the movie I shared yesterday?
Yeah.
Powerful, right? What did he talk about? Yep, he said professionals live by standards. Right? For example, if a dude shares some things, you probably want to go back and listen to it overall. But what it does is it tells me that person's commitment to success. Somebody's gone through, and I go through probably 5, 6, 7 videos before I actually share one. Why is that? 'Cause some say things I don't like, some things I don't agree with, some that I don't think beneficial. And ultimately, that's some really powerful stuff, the one yesterday, but he talks about that professionals live by standards.